Okay, so when we think about multiplying and dividing integers, let's think about let's start with multiplication. Really, multiplication and division are going to have the exact same rules. So thinking about multiplication, you're going to know the division rules and vice versa. So let's think about what multiplication means, right? If I have, for example, 3 times 4, right? We can think of that as either 3 groups of 4 or 4 groups of 3 being added together, right? So 3 times 4 I could think of as 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, right? Multiplication, one of its things is it's shortcut for repeated addition. Okay, well, we can use the same idea if we want to start thinking about negatives, right? Let's say I had negative 3 times 4, right? I could think of that as negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3. So negative plus 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6, right? These two together make negative 6. Together they make negative 12. So negative 3 times 4 we can think of as negative 12. Okay. So if we notice we have one negative, right, and negative times a positive, our result's going to be negative. The same thing's going to be true with division. If you have one negative and one positive, the result is going to be a negative. Okay. So that is going to be our first rule. A negative times a positive, or vice versa, right? Positive times a negative equals a negative. Okay. Again, it's the same with division. Okay. There's no separate rule. If you have one negative, the answer is going to be negative. Okay, when you're multiplying or dividing two integers. All right. Now, let's think about what happens when you have two negatives. All right, negative 4 times negative 2. Okay, and this gets in the idea that negative being an opposite, right? The negative and opposite and how those go together. Okay, and we've talked opposites when we talk subtraction, like the opposite of a negative is a positive, and so on, right? So let's think of negative 4 as being negative 1 times 4. Okay, or you could think of it, if we think of negative 1 as being opposite, you can think of it as, what's the opposite of 4 times negative 2? Well, 4 times negative 2, right? That means 4 negative 2's added together. That's negative 8. So what's the opposite of negative 8? Okay, or mathematically, what's negative 1 times negative 8? Right, the opposite of negative 8 is going to be positive 8. Okay, so think of that negative sign as being an opposite, right? What's the opposite of 4 times negative 2? Well, that's 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. The opposite of that is positive 8. Okay, so the number of negative signs is what makes the difference there. Right? So again, we can see that if I have two negative numbers being multiplied, negative 4 times negative 2, there we go, is equal to a positive 8. The same thing is going to be true with division. Negative 8 divided by negative 4 is going to be positive 2. Okay, so two negatives multiplying, dividing is going to make a positive, right? And when we start looking at numbers with more than 2 negatives, 3 negatives, 4 negatives, right? We can kind of think about that as well. So let's say, for example, we had like negative 8, right? And then I put that out front, and we wouldn't read that as negative 8. We would read that as the opposite of negative 8. Okay, well, what's the opposite of negative 8? That's 8, right? Now let's say I had something like this, 3 negative signs, right? Well, we'd read that as the inside's negative 8, and then we want the opposite of that, and then the opposite of that. So that's the opposite of negative 8, right? If I work inside out, right, I've seen right up here, the opposite of negative 8 is positive 8. Well, if I have the opposite of that, right, that'd be equal to negative 8. Okay, so if we start looking at our patterns, essentially it takes two negatives in this case to kind of cancel out and make a positive, right? I've got two negatives there. Okay, they cancel out and make a positive, just like when we multiply or divide. In my second example, right, I've got 1, 2, 3 negatives, right? So the two negatives cancel out, right? We're left with one still there. It's like if you have 3 people and you're making groups of 2, well, there's going to be 1 left over, right? We have 1 negative sign left over, so your answer is going to stay negative. Okay? Hypothetically, even though it seems a little bit silly, let's say I had a problem like that. I think I got the right amount there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives. Well, can I put them into groups of 2 and cancel them all out? Well, 6 is an even number, so yeah, I could. Right? So that's going to be positive 8. Okay? If I added another negative there, right? We now have 7 negative signs. You're going to have an extra that you can't cancel out. It's going to be 8. So when we're dealing with negatives, again, 2 negatives are going to make a positive. So anytime you have an even amount of negatives, those are going to cancel each other out and leave you with a positive number. If you have a negative amount of, or not a negative, I apologize, odd amount of negatives, right? You're not going to be able to cancel them all out. There'll always be that one extra. Just like if you're trying to make pairs and you have an odd sock or something like that, right? You're going to have that one extra that you can't pair with anything, so it's going to remain there. Okay, so when we're dealing with negatives, it's the number of negatives that matter, multiplying and dividing. Even number, okay, 2, 4, whatever, it's going to be positive. If you have an odd number, it's going to be negative. Right? So negative times a negative equals negative times a positive is a negative. Same with division, right? Negative times negative equals a positive. Okay, and again, same with division. Same with division. Okay, now let's go ahead and just try a couple sample problems here. Negative 8 times 3. Oh, what am I doing? Let's try number 2. There we go. And let's do negative 24 divided by negative 6. Go ahead and pause the video, give those a try, come on back, we'll look at the answer. All right, the first one, right, 1 negative sign, so that's going to stay negative. Second, 2 negative signs cancel out, so that is going to turn positive. It's going to turn positive. All right, let's try just a couple of more here. Let's say we had something like the opposite of negative 5. Okay, we'll make that problem 3. Problem 4, let's put a couple things together here. The opposite of negative 2 divided by the opposite of negative, we'll make it easy, negative 1. Okay, again, go ahead and pause, give these a try, and we'll come back and go over the answers. All right, so number 3, right, the opposite of negative 5 is how we'd read that. Again, 2 negative signs, they would cancel out and make a positive. Okay, and then our fourth one, the opposite of negative 2, well, we have 3 negative signs, so you're going to have 1 left over that you can't cancel out, so that is a value of negative 2. The opposite of negative 1 is 1, and negative 2 divided by negative 1, again, 1 negative sign, is going to leave you with negative 2. Okay, so again, multiplying and dividing, it's the number of negative signs that matter. If you can cancel them out, meaning there's an even amount of negative signs, the answer will stay positive. If you have an odd amount of negative signs, you're always going to have that 1 left over you can't cancel out, so it will stay negative.